Welcome to the Legendary Upside podcast. My name is Pat Crane. You can find all of my content at legendaryupside.com. And we have a new addition to legendaryupside.com. That's why we're rolling out this podcast. ShaidyAdvice joining the team. Shaidy, welcome to Legendary Upside. Welcome to the pod. Excited to have you on.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Look forward to chatting and contributing when I can.
Yeah, so let's get like a little bit of a background on your kind of journey into best ball and DFS and how kind of you got into these types of games for people who don't know.
So we could start with DFS. I had a friend who, for people from DFS will know a lot, Whistles Go Woo, who was harassing me for a number of years that I should try out this game. He thought was a lot of fun, and he thought there might be an edge in. The pandemic happened, and we had a lot of free time, so we tried to go and solve that. Had a lot of success, and it was a lot of fun. Still is. Still play that pretty regularly. Best ball, I was like one of those weird. I don't know if it's right. Maybe a lot of people this way, where like I really enjoyed the content that was out there, even though I hadn't played any best ball until last August, I want to say. And I was mostly looking at it as a way to shift some tax liability around from a good DFS year. I was like, you know what, if I can get down a bunch of money on some sites that are going to pay out at the end of the year, this is a good way to spend some time, especially it's something I enjoy doing. And then people may or may not be aware, I luck boxed into third place in PBM last year. And that was pretty nice surprise as well.
So the goal with DFS is to be so successful that locking up your money in best ball actually becomes a financial advantage.
That is a fortunate situation to be in, yes.
And, you know, you had so much Brees Hall that, I don't know, I don't want you to say you were luck boxing it, because it sounds like from what I've heard, you were using the LegUp rankings last year, and you were kind of just went phone shooter bro with it, is what you were saying.
Yeah, so I was a diehard LegUp ranking user. I think that will probably lead us into why I'm here. I think one of the things I struggled a lot with, not that I was upset I had that much Brees Hall when it came down to it, was really trying to figure out when it was right to diversify. As someone who knew nothing about the way the rankings were there, and when two people are at the top of the queue, when should I, aside from the rules that we've sort of all learned from spending too much time on Pete's shows about breaking ties in the favor of correlation and things like that, when is the right time to make that the opposite choice from whatever is sitting there at the top, just because you don't want to make the same stacks over and over again.
And Sack, I know you've like literally used like, random.org or something to, you randomize some of those types of decisions, right?
Yeah, that's what I was doing in the past years, but after talking to Shaidy a little bit, I think we've got a better solution than just random.org this year, which is nice because random.org got a little hectic. If I was multi-tabling, it could be a lot to go back and forth for like 5 drafts and try and get it in under the gun.
Missing a pick because you couldn't apply randomness fast enough is, I mean, that is a true live a little. You need to live a little.
I refuse.
So that's, third place in BBM, pretty exciting stuff. What's your kind of thinking this year with like best ball? What's your plan of attack?
So there's some really good rake back deals right now in May that I'm going to take advantage of, particularly on Underdog and DraftKings. I don't play on other sites currently, but maybe I will if the deals get good enough. I think there's a lot of conversation going on about like maybe we frame this differently. One of the most often ways that people start a conversation with me about DFS is, you're super good, I want to tell me how to beat you. Like I want to figure out how to beat you. Something like that, right? And a lot of times you have to make sure people aware, like the goal of a peer-to-peer game is not to beat the best player, right? Or a good player, or even a profitable player. Your goal is to get, your fair share of the bad player's money. And I think a lot of the conversations that I hear going on now are really fun and exciting about getting really sharp about your edges, but sometimes miss the goal that who we're trying to beat and what they might be doing and the ways that we can take advantage and make sure that we're still building lineups that can beat them and not just the other sickos who are drafting.
Yeah. On Pete's show on Best Ball After Dark, you had mentioned that you probably lean towards DraftKings being a little bit higher EV than Underdog because we collectively, the kind of belief is that there's some softer money on DraftKings, softer drafts on DraftKings, easier to build super teams on DraftKings. But then you have to compete against the other sharp player super teams. And so you could make the case that, in fact, it's easier to win on Underdog because, when you get to the semifinals or whatever, the teams might not be as strong. But that philosophy of what we're trying to do is kind of get our fair share of the softer money would have you thinking maybe DraftKings is actually slightly softer. But that's kind of the correct way you think about it?
If you believe that it was softer, and
right, if you believe
don't have a reason to believe that it's not, then there is more dead money, and it's very, very hard to be good enough at something else to make up for that extra soft money that is just sitting there for you to soak up. And
so stuff like stacking, there's certain things I think we're now getting to the point where people are wondering if the field is should we start doing things that are a little bit pushing the edges so that we're standing out from the crowd, from the sharp crowd. But it sounds like from what you're saying, it's still really important to kind of do the blocking and tackling of best ball and, kind of building smart teams the way that we, there's evidence to suggest are really good kind of fundamental ways of building these teams. Yeah, I think maybe there's some argument when you get to high enough stakes that people are not making the kind of mistakes that you need them to make for there to be free money. Although Zach has said that there's some real soft people up there drafting, and so maybe there's still enough dead money at those high stakes. If Zach shows up on one of your DK drafts, just know that he knew you were in it beforehand. Yeah, so I think that it comes down to figuring out the same way in DFS, who is paying the rake. And then after you figure out who's paying the rake, how are you getting the extra money that's still left over? And how out there, I suppose, or how precise does your edge need to be to carve off that bit of the cake? Or is it you just being handed a cake and you could probably just eat the cake? You don't need to worry about too fine a point.
You had a really interesting point in a conversation we were having the other day where we were talking about when you get a really potent start, you got, this incredible combination, huge value in a faller. And these are players that you both really like, and you're really excited about this. You think this team is set up to crush. You described what you should do next as don't drop the baby. So you don't have to go once you've already got, you've locked up what you're pretty confident is a decent edge in a draft. You don't have to go and do anything terribly special for the rest of the draft. Just don't mess it up, dummy. And that was such a great way to frame it, I think. We always hear people talk about, you need to land the plane. But hearing it as, hey, just don't drop the baby made so much sense to me. And I really enjoyed having it framed that way.
I think that was a Jason Somerville reference from his old days street poker on Twitch. If I want to give full credit to the don't drop the baby reference. But. Yeah, I think there is something to that, especially, and I think on the softer of the two platforms, like with DraftKings, I find myself in the don't drop the baby mode more often where I'm like, all right, someone has handed me some extra EV here. And all I need, I'm going to break ties towards taking the quarterback, getting that double stack quarterback now, as opposed to pushing it. It's I could take him 8 picks ahead of ADP or 3 picks after ADP. I'm taking him 8 picks ahead. And on Underdog, I might push that because I haven't kind of already secured EV. So yeah, I like that thinking a lot, is especially as a way of deciding what am I going to do here? Am I going to try to push this stack a little bit? If you already have a massive value on that team, just securing that is a really strong team in your portfolio, I think makes a lot of sense. Even when you don't have a super team, you can get caught up in this is what I think a smart person is going to do here. So I'm going to do something different to get different from the other teams that smart people are drafting. And that can be a good way to burn off a bunch of EV as well, because again, you're not trying to beat that other smart person who's in drafting the same team as you. You obviously don't want to show up with an identical team or one that is too similar so that you're at risk of not winning the contest. But a lot of times the smart choice is not being made frequently enough that it becomes a bad choice.
Yeah, you had a showdown, and this is again from Pete's Best Ball After Dark, but you had you're talking about in Showdown how if a lineup was duped zero, like you think that you have two lineups, one of them's likely to be duped 10 times and one of them's likely to not be duped. And they have the same EV or you're the same expected ROI in the lineup, that you'd actually play the one that's expected to be duped 10 times because it's a less fragile projection. But also kind of, that which is interesting because it's like, okay, yeah, if the lineup is actually duped 11 times and not 10 versus it's actually duped once instead of 0, that makes a big difference. But the idea of kind of being less focused than I think a lot of the Showdown discussion that I've heard on dupes in general, it's like trying to figure out like, hey, if this strategy is actually still underutilized, even if it's somewhat widely utilized, it can be an edge to continue doing it.
Yeah, I think we can talk about DFS Showdown for a long time. But your ideal situation is that you have a bunch of lineups that you think are going to be duped once or 0 times, and you get lucky one slate and they're all duped 0 times, right? But sometimes smart people are playing the same things as you because you're getting signal that you're making reasonable choices. And so, but if you're playing entirely unique lineups, either you know something that an entire field of players playing DFS doesn't know, or you're probably not making a bunch of good decisions.
Would it be fair to say that, like, kind of one of the ways that you think about these games, and I think kind of, I'm hoping you're saying yes, because I think this is going to generally lead us to sort of what you'll be bringing to Legendary Upside. But is it fair to say that in general, people are probably kind of thinking too much about where they're sitting relative to like what the rest of the field is doing, and not enough about how much of their own EV they're scooping by playing sets of lineups that are too similar to their other lineups?
Yeah, for sure. In DFS, I would have agreed with you very, very loudly a year ago. I think people are getting better and talking more about portfolio stuff in the DFS space. And people are just starting to talk about that in best ball, which is why it's an exciting time to be here and thinking about ways that we can do that better. But yeah, I think, the worst thing that, it's maybe not the worst thing, but like a really bad thing that could happen to you in BBM is to show up with 2 identical teams to the final, right? That would be catastrophic. You have basically torched all of your EV in that final round. Second worst thing is showing up with 2 teams that end up having the same scoring set in that final week, right? Because then you're basically duping yourself even though they didn't have the same players. So figuring out ways that you can get there and not scoop that final round EV. One of the things, I guess, I don't think we want to get into this week 16 versus week 17 conversation in this, but one of the interesting things about week 16 versus week 17 is they will not play you in the same pod with yourself, which is actually kind of a nice benefit to have of unblocking yourself. At least I think, I know Underdog or DK won't. I think Underdog also won't put you in the same pod with yourself.
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Kind of a nice way that they're like diversifying some for you and that you aren't going to skip your EV until week 17. But
believe it or not, you can play yourself on FFPC though.
I've gotten one FFPC bullet in this year. It was auto draft because I forgot that it started last night and didn't. Thanks for the email notification that never came. Jerko was just watching me auto draft 18 running backs on FFPC. Now, so yes, it's bad to go to week 17 and you got two of the same lineup, but like, let's if I'm, not having thought through this as deeply as you have, it's like, well, it's better than someone else getting that lineup in. I've got 2 lineups in. It's kind of like having the same. Why is this like such an avoid this at all costs sort of situation?
Because the most likely reason you did that, or most likely reason that happened, is you took some really big correlated stands with each other, and so you are super right this coming year at the cost of possibly being right in some future years. So you're like having a super high variance way of playing a single slate, which in when you don't get to play one a year, like that's pretty important to have a diverse way to try to get to money every year. And so you are giving up some of that theoretical EV you thought you had because now you're competing with yourself for that prize pool, which is not ideal in a way that is very cannibalistic.
That's a topic I definitely want to hear you expand on. And you've been a little too modest so far. So for people that don't know and are not like super closely following DFS, Shaidy is one of, if not the best players currently at diversifying his portfolio of DFS lineups every night. And I think it'd be really interesting to hear you talk about why it's important to play a diverse strategy in games like these.
So there's a very like concrete example, which is if you get first and second in a contest, you've only taken money from yourself, right? Because the goal of the lineup is to take first, and when you're already in first, the next lineup you play in that contest can do, and that given set of outcomes is take money from yourself, right? We want to avoid that because most of the EV and these top heavy contests come from getting first. And so when you're just beating yourself in first, that's bad. And that's sort of like visceral and you can look at it, but then it's kind of fun to post a screenshot of taking down the top 10 places. So maybe people still do it. But the other reason is like managing your risk, right? And so if you think about coming into a contest and gambling in general, the higher risk strategy you're playing, the less amount of your money you're supposed to or able to invest in something without risk of going broke. I guess a lot of people probably play best ball and DFS for fun. And when their bankroll runs out, they put more money in and then they keep going and they go, well, shucks, it's worth it for the money. But it's worth it for the entertainment value. But if you are thinking about something as a way to continually turn a profit and keep a bankroll going, it's really important that that bankroll doesn't go down too fast because then you have less money to play with the next time you try and play.
Best ball is a pretty highly variance game. So, I mean, when you go from kind of DFS to best ball and you're thinking through that kind of, portfolio bankroll management principles, like how does that kind of move from one format to the other?
I mean, it's less variant than DFS as far as a single slate goes, right? If I'm playing the Mega Milli, it's 50% of the prize pool to first in a slate, which is absurd. I can't believe that that's a contest they put in and that people actually enter, right? Like I got second place in one of the NBA ones this year for $150K. As opposed to $1 million to first by a rebound, right? Like that is absurd variance that is like insane out there. The reason best ball is insanely high variance is that you only get to play once a year. And so it's it feels like a much larger commitment, and it is, I guess, because you're spending a long time and locking money up for a long time. But like if you were to like abstract it into like just a math game that happens and then you find the result out at the end, it's actually not that different than DFS from a variance perspective.
So it's kind of like you finished third in a week 4 contest. I won the week 3 contest. Liam won the week 2 contest. This is sort of the game we're playing. Justin won the week 1 contest. That kind of. So it's very. It's just going to take us a couple decades to play out a full NFL season.
Yeah, but the advantage is it's still super early and people haven't figured it out, right? Like people have had hundreds of DFS slates to figure out the game and get good at it. And so I think it is reasonable to expect that there is a lot more edge in best ball than there is in DFS right now, almost guaranteed. And so you are still playing a relatively soft game that doesn't need decades of research to beat it. Luckily, I mean, to get better, we will hopefully have decades of playing this, but you don't need it to beat the one slate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and kind of to your point earlier, if the game is softer and it's fun, then there's a reason to be playing softer games because we're trying to we're not necessarily laser focused on trying to beat the very, very best. Now, do you see the flatter payout structure this year in BBM as a good thing? In a similar thing, like, because what just came to mind was, if it was all the money in the entire tournament was paid out to first place, then you really would want to be the very best drafter. But if it's a little flatter, then it actually is rewarding some of the good not great players a little more. Is that a fair way to look at it?
I'm going to answer this in 3 different ways because that's the best way to answer things, right? So as someone who only cares about ROI in a contest, the highest ROI contest for skilled players is something that pays 100% of the contest to first. Winner take all has the most ROI of any contest you can play.
Okay.
It sucks not winning those. And so the next question you have to ask is, okay, well, can I still have, how much edge in a contest am I willing to give up as someone who thinks they're good to have reduced variance in my performance in that contest, given how often I can play that contest in a given, for me, tax year, because that is what matters as far as the amount of variance I have to play Uncle Sam each year. And so with a contest that runs once a year, I think you actually want it quite flat so that you are not paying taxes and then trying to pay off taxes on unless you set up a business, which I still play this all as a hobby, which surprises people a lot. You can't deduct losses from gains. And so you actually lose a lot of your gains and years that you gain them trying to pay off years that you don't win. So it's very important to try and be profitable within a year. So I think flatter is quite good. And I do think that best ball itself is soft enough that flatness is not going to remove the edge. Like, it's going to remove some of the edge, but like the expectation of profitable players is still probably quite high. And now the median outcome or expected outcome is enough profitable that it becomes a lot more enticing to play every year to try and sort of have a profitable season without giving up that upside of being able to win.
That makes sense. Sack, do you have anything?
Yeah, so just to kind of frame how you view the edge in best ball relative to the edge in DFS, because I've heard lots of DFS people say, like, there's really no point to tying up your money in best ball because, I can turn that over 100 slates over before I'm ever going to get paid out from best ball. So I'd have to have such a monumental edge, which certainly makes sense. Like, if you're a very skilled DFS player, like, it's probably not prudent to lock up a ton of your bankroll in best ball. But if you had to estimate for like a 150 set in DFS in the harder sports like NBA, MLB, you're pretty happy with like low double-digit simmed ROIs, right? And like in NFL, you can get up to a little higher than that because the fields are softer. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of those. But what would you assume like a really good best ball portfolio might be able to get to in the big lottos?
Probably 50 to 100%. Like, I would assume that we're at the point where those for simmed out stuff, that seems about right. For a portfolio of 150. Higher if you're really taking a stand and like, the biggest issue with simming stuff with your own things is if you're like, say, super high in Jaylen Warren, for example. And so your portfolio has a lot of Jaylen Warren. And so you end up assuming that then picking Jaylen Warren was a really good choice. And so you sim really well. And so like, there's a bit of snake eating its own tail if you try to sim that up. But if you were to like try to like normalize it to something a little bit less overfit, 50% to 100 seems pretty reasonable.
So I can start selling my best ball teams with like 30% markup. You think that's super fair is what I'm
Yeah, if you're not already doing that on Stake Kings, I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, they have Warren on them. I might be interested. So, because you in DFS, like if you're kind of looking for a portfolio of lineups that all have the highest ROI, I've heard you say that that'll kind of slowly kind of push you towards a very concentrated group of players. And, let's say you were doing best ball, you were kind of building a portfolio with the Legendary Upside rankings, it would push you to a lot of Jaylen Warren, for example. and some other guys that you would end up being very concentrated on. This is something that I intentionally did last year with Breece Hall and Jalen Warren. I did take big stands, kind of reevaluated those over the course of the year, and I was like, yeah, I want to have these stands. The same time, I probably played a little too concentrated overall around those guys, which I just wrote about yesterday. I had an article on the site kind of going through those types of thoughts. When you think about like what your theoretical like simmed out ROI could be with the best ball portfolio, like how much are you kind of wanting to back off of that? Like, if you're like ROI hacking it, you're backing off so that you have like not a super concentrated type of portfolio, if that makes sense.
So I think that at least for the big lottos, we are still in the people are playing bad enough lineups that if you just had the equivalent of DFS projections, like you're probably still profitable. And so that's to say that like if I were just me and drafting with my own ranks that I came up and didn't think any of the field was using, I'd be a lot more careful than knowing that there's a bunch of other LegUp people out there who might take the other people who are high on LegUp ranks from me. And that would sort of help. The fact that there are other people using LegUp ranks helps balance my portfolio because they're also going to want Jalen Warren around the same time that I do. And so that would reduce that exposure. I don't think you need to be super. I think I was okay having that exposure to like one or two players, then just being really careful, as you mentioned in your article, like not making all of those bets always at the same time, always correlated together, so that you're not tying these two uncorrelated things that you think are good to only happening at the same time. That's just mostly an EV thing and some of a portfolio thing too, because you just don't want to be upset that you killed all your teams. But I think you can still get that.
Yeah, one of the ways I've been trying to think about it is like when you actually flip over the cards on, week 17 and you see what lineups have made the finals, it is like I'm so much less frustrated. Like imagine you have like a Breece Hall from last year and you flip over and both teams are Breece Hall teams. Like, okay, that doesn't bother me. What would bother me is if I had both of them had like Jacksonville stacks and Lions stacks with like bring back, maybe they were slightly different players, but like bring backs from the opposite week 17 games. And like my path to winning comes down to 2 games blowing up. And then I actually have these 2 lineups bubbling up, or those 2 games don't go off and I'm dead. That's kind of to me, like what you don't want to put yourself in. And if you have those 2 lineups and like one of them has Breece Hall and one doesn't, like, I don't know if that even helps that much, like they're so similar already.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of think of best ball as drafting a poker hand that is going to play 4 flops, basically, or like play a small cash game and then play 3 tournament flops, whatever it is. And so you don't want to not take aces if someone deals you aces, but maybe you don't want to have aces every time, because then you're not able to, like, if you got to like pick your own hand that you're playing for each of the rounds, like you might want to have some ace king suited. You might want to have some other things, so you have some other outs to those things. Because if you show up and it's only you with aces at the final table, like around week 17, that's not great, because everyone else is also going to try to show up with aces, and then everybody's just chopping the pot, something like that, right? There is some way that you can figure out good textures of DFS lineups or best ball lineups through this like competitive drafting thing, which I think is why it's a fun problem to solve, because you don't have full control like the way you do in DFS over like what lineups you get to pick for your 150, because you have to beat these other people in it, which is why you can be more condensed, because when you get those options, you don't want to necessarily assume that the next draft you're also going to be able to get them at the price that you want.
Yeah, one thing I try to do is, if you think about kind of the poker analogy, I guess, like if I think this thing's the best, kind of the aces type of analogy, and I've already got a bunch of it, using the turns to my advantage is one way that I'll do it. Like, all right, I'm down to do this again, but I'm going to push that second guy around the turn. And if he doesn't come back, he doesn't come back. That's my version of random.org. And I only start doing that once I'm like, I already have this. And maybe I already have it a couple times, so let me throw it around the corner, throw it around the turn and see if this combo comes back. And if it does come back, it'll kind of be more unique because I'll have taken this other player ahead that I normally don't. And I think like Breece Hall, like these are generally guys I'm taking a ton of, and I know I'm going to keep taking a lot of that. I would do that with Devon Achane would be an example in these early drafts where pretty soon I'm going to start throwing him around the 2-3 turn. I've been taking a lot in the late second. All right, you know what? Let me grab Brandon Ayuk. Let me grab Deebo Samuel, whatever, in the second and see if Achane comes back. If he doesn't, that's probably good for me. I probably need to diversify a little bit more. If he does, now I have a cool new combo.
Yeah, I think that's something I would do a lot more of now in the snapshot tournaments and the ones that we don't know a lot about where ATP is going to move over the summer, because just pushing it for a unique combo now doesn't necessarily make it unique later.
Right.
Even to you, right? Like when you're drafting again in August, like that might just be where the ADPs are. And so now you're drafting that team again, but now you've made a choice to intentionally draft what you thought was a worse team now. You just want to be careful of, again, dropping that baby that you've sort of already built just for the sake of being different from yourself, who presumably you think is a smart drafter.
That makes sense.
The thing that you do want to do is not, so this is a good sort of transition. So like one of the reason we're here is one of my most frustrating things last summer was not knowing whether the person on top of the queue was the person I should definitely be taking, or if I should sometimes, based on like a skill assessment from someone who knows player skill, be taking some other person further down at some rate. And so working to figure out when those choices are the right choice, sort of from an EV choice versus just the one that happens to look like the right choice, because that's who's on top of my ranks right now, is something that I'm super excited to figure out and start making the right choices rather than just because that's what's on top of Pat's rank. Because I do trust Pat's ranks, and so I use them a lot. But they gave me a lot of, I think, these pairwise correlations that I wasn't making the choice because of any particular reason. Just I drafted all of my 94 best ball mania teams in the last 3 or 4 weeks of August, and so I had the same ranks basically the entire time.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because it's the same time window, so it's going to be even more concentrated. Yeah.
That reminds me of something I've got to share about when you were using the playoff best ball tool last year. You'd message me and say, hey, I think that I should pick this, but I don't actually know what teams are in what division for the NFL. So if you could just have a little thing at the bottom that would let me know like who is in which division definitively, that would be great for me. And that was when I found out what a truly sick individual you were. I had gotten advice from you before on like, getting over stuff that I was stuck on in DFS, like trying to solve problems. And I knew you were a math guy. I didn't know how little you like actually watched. I later found out you just watch the dots. You don't even watch the games. You just watch the NFL players dots. Yeah. So then fast forward to earlier this year, prior to you joining the team, and you were asking me questions that I was asking Pat last year when I was not part of the team of, hey, I'd really like to see like what the pure ranks are. And like, do you have like an actual value for the players and not just like an ordinal rank number? And I was talking to Pat about it. I'm like, hey, Shaidy really wants us to do this. He's like, that guy already wins all the money. We're not helping him anymore. Like, no, we're not going to do extra work just to make this guy who's already really good even better. So then when you finally ask like, okay, hey, I have these cool projects I want to work on, but I could definitely use a little bit more help from you guys who are going to do more of the player specific evaluation stuff to really let me do some cool math stuff. I was pretty excited about that.
I'm excited too. I mean, like, I struggle with that myself with my own rankings of like, is it time now to take this guy that I don't, if something's 50-50, it's easy enough to go, okay, I took the other guy last time, let me take this guy, right? But a lot of these decisions aren't 50-50, they're like 70-30 or they're 80-20. And I think I generally struggle to like take that 20. I think the human mind generally struggles to take that 20. You see that with like people estimating, how likely something is to happen. If something's like 80% happen and you survey people, they're going to be like 90% of people say it's going to happen, or 100% of people.
Doesn't feel good to order your second favorite ice cream flavor on purpose.
Yes,
if they're out of it, sure.
Exactly.
Like, why? I like that one better. Why would I want that ice cream?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And yeah, I've tried to trick myself in certain ways. Like I've talked about this before, but like in the final rounds, when I just can't stop taking a guy, I never tell myself a story about why, I don't like that flavor anymore. I tell myself a story about why my second favorite flavor is actually even that much better. And I try to trick myself into using that, like that love of the excitement of taking an 18th round flyer. I sell myself on a different flyer so that I cool off on the other one. But I just think, and that isn't perfect either, because then like I've got this time window where I'm taking way too much of this guy, then the next week I'm taking way too much of the next guy. And, maybe if I just were, mixing them in a little bit more evenly over the course of time, that's actually the team that needed that flyer on it. So it's that type of the ability to do that. Some help with doing that, I think, would be awesome, even for me, as I'm trying to do this. Like I'm actively trying to do this, and I still feel like I'm not getting there. So we are very excited to have you kind of helping out, and we're working on it. We're working on it.
And the toughest part, I think, is because like, we say we're trying to do this, like you're doing it by hacking your brain and telling yourself stories about players. I'm doing it with random.org. But the thing is that there's a correct frequency. Like if we could measure all of this stuff accurately, there's a correct amount of time that we should be taking player B over player A, or player C over player B and A. And the hard part is, no amount of hacking or like crude random.orging is going to actually get you to the correct frequency. So having a systemic approach to it, I think, is really important. And that's some of the stuff that we've been working on that I'm super excited to share with people. Hopefully we can finally stop teasing it before too long and get it into people's hands. But
for sure. Yeah. I mean, and I think with best ball too, why this whole concept is really important is that it's not just like that one player, right? Like if you're like, let's say you're deciding, is this time for me to take, should I go ahead and break a tie in the third round and grab like a DJ Moore, or should I grab Josh Allen? Well, if you grab Josh Allen, you're going to take some Bills, and potentially you're going to go ahead and grab James Cook or Dalton Kincaid in the next couple rounds. Well, that pushed you away from wide receiver, and you already took a quarterback. So, now we know max you're going to have 3 quarterbacks in the early round. So it has structural implications. So if you're drafting a bunch of you're always breaking that tie to Josh Allen. Now you're probably underweight really wide receiver heavy teams in the early rounds because of the way his stacks line up. You might be overweight wide receivers around pick 100 because that's where Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir are. So it has these like, correlated effect. Like if we weren't trying to build stacked and correlated teams, this wouldn't matter so much, but we are. And I think there's a lot of edge to building that way, but it then makes the ability to properly break ties or do things at the frequency that if we all sat down and said, at what frequencies, would we like to take Allen versus DJ Moore or whatever, and then just being true to that. like not even saying like we're 100% going to get that correct, but just saying like back of the napkin, what do we think? Okay, let's try to like do that and do it in a way that's not like, on August 15th, I'm like, I haven't done that at all. I gotta start fixing that now. Like, no, let's try to do it like as we go, and kind of make sure that we're sort of staying on track as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that you brought up a really good point that I maybe hadn't heard and I knew felt wrong, but I hadn't really put my finger on it. That this narrative, like draft your teams now and like fix your exposures in August, is like quite harmful, right? Like, I mean, it's not necessarily wrong if you have good stands now. Like, you probably want to be taking the players you agree with, but you also want to be doing that in August. You're going to have player takes. You're going to believe things, and so if you're just relying on that draft window to do all your exposure fixing, then you're going to miss out on a lot of really good teams you could have built because you're more focused on fixing something that you made a mistake on earlier in the year.
Yeah, for Reed one, his team was drafted in the final days of the tournament. Like you want to be drafting to win the tournament in the final days, not to like fill some hole of like, here's the 18 dudes I forgot about and they're all together.
Yeah,
it was certainly drafted at some point in the last 3 weeks. I don't know when, but sometime in that window as well.
To kind of like make a comparison to it, it would be like if for the week 1 NFL DFS slate, we started making our teams now, but every day the prices changed on those players. And then you were trying to optimize your portfolio and have a really well-balanced portfolio with well-constructed teams, but you never checked it until halfway through the summer. And all of a sudden you can't even build the team that you need to build in your portfolio to be balanced is a team that costs $58,000 of salary, and you only have 50. Unlucky, I guess. Probably should have looked sooner. And so that whole concept of like diversification is something to be carried out systemically and not something to be done retroactively. It's really a proactive exercise. Is something that I think is super important. But we've talked a ton about diversification. I want to kind of give a little bit of a look ahead to LegUp subs for what they can expect, other things outside of the diversification stuff that you might be helping out with in the background, or things that may be going on under the hood to give them an advantage here going into 2024 best ball season.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these trade-off questions that I think we've been talking about, I think have ways that you can run some math and figure them out. So like, when is the correlation worth taking? How far does a player you don't like need to fall in ADP to be worth taking over the stack you had marked? Week 16 versus 17, like what's the value of that when you actually think about the things you have together?
Do we want to get a little into the week 16 versus 17 questions? I do think that's interesting and kind of something that's sort of in the zeitgeist, in our random little zeitgeist right now.
Sure. I think it's hard because we don't have a schedule to know what we're giving up and those sorts of things. But it is, I guess, for those who aren't aware, because of the flatter payout structure, placing in the top 1/16th of week 16 is a higher sort of ratio of return to what you would get if you sort of min cash that or got second 16th of that week compared to the last week. And so it looks like there is a more incentive to have more upside in week 16. It's only true if you're looking at it sort of divvied up that way. Obviously, getting first place in week 17 has a much higher ROI or relative ROI ratio compared to getting the minimum payout in week 17 still compared to week 16. So you're going to have to figure out and like do some actual math to figure out how much of that upside, particularly with respect to game stacking, because that is what changes between those 2 weeks, is which two teams play each other, at least in my understanding of how football works. And so
that is true. They changed.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, cool. And that is, I think that is going to be something that people are going to be talking a lot about, but that you can answer by doing some good sort of simulation of outcomes and thinking about what might end up there. And so I'm excited to get into more of that once we have some schedules and things to try to figure out, can we quantify the value of a bring back in each of those weeks, for example, or stacks without their quarterback, whatever it is that we want to look through and think about.
Yeah, and I think I was talking with Pete after we did the stream, Best Ball Breakfast yesterday about this a little bit, and it is interesting because there's kind of questions with it. There's one, if you had like a lever to pull that was better result lever, there's maybe an argument that you would just go ahead and pull that lever week 16, so that you
dome
could
game versus non-dome game or something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like yes, if you could assign like your most stacked team a dome game, you'd probably go ahead and assign it to them in week 16. And Leone has talked about this a little bit, chatted with him about it, because part of it too is like it literally happens first, and so like there is a chronological element, even though I think people generally focus on that a little too much, but it is the truth of the matter is that you do have to win week 16 first to get into week 17. But we don't have a better results lever or a dome game lever. We have a game stack lever. And game stack lever strikes me as being a lot more powerful in a 500 plus person field, or roughly 500 person field, because it's been in the 400s years past, but then in a 16 person field. Like if I was trying to pull a lever in week 16, I use this as an example with Sack, was I was saying, if I had Zay Flowers and I'm just trying to win week 16, I might be inclined to take Rashad Bateman over whoever they happen to play in week 17. Let's say they play the Browns, so Elijah Moore versus Rashad Bateman. I'm probably taking Bateman in week 16 because I'm like, I don't necessarily need to go like that extra step and bet on this specific game to blow up, because I'm just trying to finish first out of 16. I want the Ravens to do well passing the ball. That's what I want. That's my bet. That's the bet that I've already made, so I might as well double down on that bet. The nice thing is that if the Ravens do well passing the ball in week 15 or in week 17, I've also added I've created additional EV with adding Bateman, even if I don't have Lamar, by the way. However, in week 17, I think there are some more advantages to going ahead and betting on a game to blow up. You're in a field that's now going to be highly condensed. We know there's going to be a lot of chalk because of the way these tournaments, advance. That ends up condensing. The Laportas of the world, the CDs, the Amon-Ra's, they all show up in those final teams. So it ends up being pretty chalky, and it gives you a path to distance yourself from those teams, and there are a lot of teams that you need to distance yourself from. So that's kind of like where I've gotten to, is it's like the lever we have available to us is called game stack, and game stack seems to work a lot better in that week 17 field than it probably will in the week 16 field. I'm almost just want a regular stack if I'm trying to boost my week 16. Does that make sense?
It does. Best ball advancing teams is something I don't have a good instinct for, because unlike DFS, the ownership field is different based on what happens, right? And so it's one of those things that it's really hard to have the right gut instinct for, unless you sort of sim out what could happen in a various set of things and like look at what the trade options are when you made choice A versus choice B. It is weird a bit to me, not from what you said, but like in DFS terms, 500 people is not a very large contest.
Right, it's still not that big.
Right,
Yeah.
and so like you do see people slamming a lot of huge team stacks and huge game stacks in there, but that's also because the field is less condensed, right? And so figuring out that trade-off between not needing to, needing to have a less optimal lineup to win a 500 person contest than like the DK one, for example, which has 1,000 or whatever that ends up being this year. I don't remember off the top of my head. You can probably get away in both weeks having more of a team stack than a game stack approach. But I do think that if I were to pick one where I needed that, where I got extra bonus for having that upside, it's week 17, right? Because you can make more money moving up further than top one of 16. Whereas in week 16, your upside is capped. Like once you've won that, they're not going to pay you any more money, even if you score really, really high, unfortunately.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you score 180 versus 220 in week 16. All you get is a ticket to the finals.
If you have a do better lever, play that, pull that lever in week 16. If you have a score 400 points lever and you don't pull that in week 17, I think that's fucking nuts. You better pull 400 points in week 17 in my view. Because now you get there and you win it. You're basically guaranteed to win it.
Well, I think the ideal thing for week 16 is to advance with the lowest score possible, right? And you're least likely to have other players with your score also.
You want to eat in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then to expand on that a little bit, don't we think that if we are looking at the team stack lever, the larger our team stack, the more likely that we could be bringing along pieces in that team stack that may have performed poorly in week 16, and the smaller that team stack, the more likely that that's going to be the chalkier variant that shows up in week 17 if we are advancing that team.
That seems to make sense to me. The other thing that also makes sense is that if game stacks we think are correlated, which I think it's reasonable to assume, then game stacking in week 16 actually increases the chance that people have similar players to you in the final. Because if other people are also, because those are just players who are going to coincidentally do well together with correlation rather than random performance. And so if you think avoiding ownership in the final is important, not game stacking week 16 is way you could do it. Because if you think you don't need that upside, you can avoid other similar players coming along for the ride.
The other thing I would say, Stack, about your stacking point there, though, the game stacking thing, is that my gut would be the more expensive you do that, the more likely you are to end up with the important part of the stack being chalk. And now, so for example, Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, if you show up with let's say everyone but Smith is chalk in the final, and you have Devontae Parker, and Johnny Wilson, and Nia Smith, I don't think you're going to feel super psyched about your leverage. You want, ideally, I think instead that might be Drake May, Ramondre Stevenson, Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, Kendrick Bourne, right? Like that being a big stack or something, that was the cheapest one. Plus I like Drake May, but if that's, a big game stack or big team stack that you have going in, it's basically just like a lot of your cheap picks all hitting together. That strikes me as one where you probably can get away with that more. And it's more likely to bring along leverage.
Yeah, or even something like for example, Mahomes, who has lots of his stacking options that are all really similarly priced. Like you could get a Mahomes with Kelsey and Rashee Rice, and both of those receiving options are expensive enough that, it might be detrimental enough to your opponents that if one of those players duds and they didn't have the other side of that went off, you can actually get that through a little lower owned. We have dug in a little bit to this stuff for how much things condense in the finals. That'll be in the second part of this Jacquard similarity article that we'll have coming out sometime in the next couple weeks here. And so another question I had is, how much does the chalk even really matter in best ball tournament finals? Because, for example, the chalkiest two-player combo last year, which had 441 teams in the finals, the chalkiest two-player combo was Amon-Ra and CeeDee Lamb at 92 teams with that combo, which sounds like a lot, but it's only 20% ownership. And now 20% for a two-player combo is kind of high, but how important is that really? Like, how would you frame that in a DFS contest light?
So there's this weird thing, not weird, but unlike DFS, where there's this salary that comes in to sort of help normalize out your choices. Those are two players who got there because they ended up being quite good the whole season, right? And so like they might just have been good enough that you want them because they're just that good, right? Like it's not, you're not upset. You're not making this like, in DFS, sometimes you're like stacking a 4K receiver with the quarterback that a whole other people are doing that same like 20% owned like dart throw stack. Whereas in this case, maybe this was the secret to playing a 60K DFS team, right? And so saying that ownership is too high is probably not. It worked fine for me. They're on my team.
It was just right.
Just right. I think, I mean, it's really, really hard to know without running sims if it's too high or not, right? And whether or not, you know, I think the point Pat made is, I think, pretty salient in that it matters a lot more if the combos are high priced because sort of the expectation is built in that they are good players and they are doing well. So you're not actually getting a salary discount when they do well. And maybe, you know, 1-2 turn, those two players doing, you know, they ended up being wide receiver 2 or 3, or like, I don't remember their actual rank at the end of the season, but they were like actually quite good value picks. So the fact that you got them that late was enough to make up for that ownership would be my guess. But if you knew ahead of time that was actually their real rank at the end of the season and that's what their DFS salary was going to be, you probably wouldn't want an ownership combo at 20%. They were playing each other would be if I had to guess how it would play out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of comes down to, in my mind, like the idea again of like what we're trying to do, and you know, you don't necessarily have to think about it like you're trying to beat the very best player, the very best team. Like if you're, you know, it's like, oh man, this CD Amon-Ra combo is gonna be like basically the nuts. So I better fade that and come up with something that's even more than nuts. It's like, I don't know. I actually think maybe you take that and then like when you're going into week 17 and like I had CD teams in the finals of week 17, I need CD that's like, all right, man, we got this far. I need you to go nuts. And he went nuts. Like he did it. But you do need that. Like if he takes you to the promised land. I mean, the way I was able to win 2 years ago is because Justin Jefferson had the worst game of his entire season in week 17. And I had Austin Eckler, who could not be drafted with Justin Jefferson. It's dumb luck that was such big leverage on Justin Jefferson, but it provided a part of the path for me to be able to pass a bunch of teams, is that Jefferson just so happened to have a really bad game. And you basically can't have that happen because like you're going to be tied with a guy like Justin Jefferson that year, who was exclusively drafted in the first round, drags all these teams to the final. You now need to hold hands with all the other Jefferson teams as he puts you up top once more, which is what CD did last year. Now you're looking around and you're going to have to fight it out with all those other teams in some other ways. But yeah, I think fundamentally, like if you knew, you know, if you had surefire knowledge that one guy was going to have an absolutely awesome season in round 1, you should probably take him 100% of the time.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that happening in round 1, 2 also. Same with sort of Tyreek Waddle, where like you're kind of capped at the number of combos of that you can get because you only get, I mean, unless you're Sunrun Influencer 101s or whatever, no, 112s that would have been, like you just can't get that many of them. So your portfolio kind of it can't get too jammed with that mistake in the first place. So you're not overcommitted to something that's happening maybe later in the draft where you could get something like a giant ownership exposure to something, and then you'd come in way over a field that was already way overexposed rather than kind of coming in at the field, at the level the field is in the finals.
Are you planning to draft more kind of spread out at all? Because one thing that comes to mind here is like, I think that one of the big edges last year and kind of continually, I think it just the way this tournament works is that, you know, hopefully again, like we did last year with Kyron Williams, where we got concrete information. They're resting this dude. They're resting this guy in the preseason. He is clearly the RB2, and they're treating him basically like a starter. So he might have a week 1 role. no one thought he would have the season that he had, but we knew he was underpriced. Not only was he underpriced, but with the field getting on board and starting to really jam him in the final weeks, it didn't matter. He couldn't get highly owned because he had not been drafted for such a big portion of the tournament. I want to be personally in position to go ahead and do that. Now, I guess, if you're like, one disadvantage to drafting, like, let's say, very much at the end of the year is that your portfolio then might have like 90% Kyren Williams, because now if it is Kyren Williams, that's kind of awesome. But, you didn't have the portion of your portfolio that you drafted before you knew he was the answer.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that your portfolio doesn't care at the start of the NFL season when it was drafted. So, like, if you're drafting all of your lineups at the end of the year, and you should still be managing your portfolio then, and like you will have, if you have more, what's a way to think about this? If you have more of your bullets left than the contest has filled, you are guaranteed to be able to get over the field if you want to on something.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? There's no way that the field can catch up to someone who you want to get over on if you have that many bullets. How much you want to get over on somebody is probably up to you, but as the field as a whole, if they are not 100% drafted up to that point, the field cannot catch you if you decide to go for somebody. And you don't have to go that hard to get above the field, because they're going to be drafting at that same rate. So if you followed, you had all of your bullets left, you still don't need to get 90% Kyren. You could if you thought he was that smash of a play, but if you get, 20% Kyren and he is 5% owned because that is the maximum.
Right, he wasn't even drafted.
He wasn't drafted for most of it. Like, then you're guaranteed to have leverage at a player. You can leverage over a 5% owned player, not leverage over a 8% player.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you would have to basically show more restraint than I was showing, like intentionally showing at the end, because I kind of drafted even with the tournament. So then when it got to the end, it's like Kyren is a huge priority for me now, because in order to take a stand on him, I've got to be heavy now. But yeah, that's true. You could just, as we kind of keep circling back to, restraint is not in drafting. So I'd be worried that I just like, I
hope they release a lot of snapshot contests for you this year. A lot of snapshots.
I'm in the mini schnauzer already. I'm maxed out that. So far so good.
Get ready to learn slow drafts, buddy.
I know, Marty. 20 I can handle. I max entered the slow puppy in just clicked through. So they weren't even spaced out. That was tough. 20, no problem. All right. Well, I think anything else, Zach, you want to cover before we get out of here?
No, there were lots of good topics that we hit on today.
Yeah. So we're kind of obviously sort of teasing some stuff. Shaidy's gonna be more helping out behind the scenes, but he is in the Discord. If we want to jump in the Discord and talk some best ball, talk some strategy, whatever you want to do, would welcome you in there. And we're going to be kind of trying to answer some of these questions. Zach, as he mentioned, is working on part 2 of the Jacquard similarity article, arguably part 3, since my tree article is in some ways part 2 of Zach's Jacquard similarity ideas. But I think even for stuff like that, having Shaidy on the team is a massive upgrade. But we are working on some of these ideas, and we'll share more on that in the coming weeks. And let's say, coming weeks, I think is fair to say.
I do have to tell the story very briefly about you writing the tree article. So I had sent Pat a bunch of the work I was doing on the diversification stuff and Jacquard similarity, and we've been discussing it back and forth. And all of a sudden, Pat has just been typing for what felt like 20 minutes to me. And I was like, this guy's got a lot to say. And he sends a maximum character length Discord message of the first part of the tree article. And I was hooked. I was like, okay, I'm seeing the extended metaphor, but I didn't know where it was going entirely. And I sit there and wait. It's like another 15 minutes. And the second part comes through, but there's pictures. Like he's sending pictures. He's like literally composing the article on the spot. It was like divine inspiration. So I was super excited as he was writing it. I was like, oh, this is good stuff. So that was one where I'd been waiting for him to share that with people for a long time. So I'm glad you finally got that one published.
Yeah, that one was I was like, yeah, this is maybe like kind of a stretched metaphor, and I like kind of did it, and then I was like, well, if I do it like this, it's not so stretched, and then I just like went back and deleted the "this is a stretched metaphor" part. So like, no, I got it, and then the metaphor works. But yeah, that one's a lot of fun. By the way, we've referenced that article a couple times, and Sack's part 1 of the card similarity. Both are free on Legendary Upside. We want to kind of get these ideas percolating in space. So if you're curious kind of about like further reading, this got some ideas turning your head, and you want to check out those articles, they are completely free on the site. Plan is to just have them up there completely free so that you can kind of get thinking about these concepts. And I think that the tree one really dives into exactly what we talked about earlier with like, if you're going to take big stands on a guy like we did with Breece Hall last year, now what is the idea there? So look out for Sack's part 2 of History Card Similarity article. And we're going to keep rolling out great content here on Legendary Upside. More capable of doing that now than ever. So talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching.